In 1998, I think, I moved from Springfield, Illinois to Chicago. And I was living in a very, very nice neighborhood. I was living in Old Town, pretty high price, nice apartments and houses. The Cardinal Archbishop had his big mansion a couple blocks from where I lived. I lived almost right at the corner of North Avenue and Wells, which is right in the center of Old Town. And I would take the L train every day into work. I worked in the Loop on Randolph Street. And I would take the Brown line, if anybody's familiar with Chicago. It's a Sedgwick line. And so it was about a 2-block. Oh, I think I've mentioned this in a previous homily as well. When I arrived there, I had been going to Mass every day in Springfield for the couple years before I moved there. And then I moved to Chicago, and there's this little church, Immaculate Conception Church, literally as close as the parking lot is to where I was living. And so I kept going to Mass every day. Father Pat Lee was the pastor then. So when I would go to work in the morning, I had to just walk about 2 blocks to pick up the L train. And most days I was there on my way to the L stop. There would be this woman standing on the sidewalk, just like this. I never saw her say anything to anyone. She just stood there, and she had on these long sorts of black robes and things. She wasn't a religious. She was just this person standing there, and she had these 2 bags on either side of her. And sometimes I would see her walking to her spot just outside the Sedgwick Avenue L stop, and they were so heavy, she would kind of like walk a step, and then she'd move one, and then move the other one, and then walk another step, and then move one, and move the other one. And like she didn't want them to get too far away from her. And I had this idea, probably somebody stole one someday. So she was ready, And now this story, I'm embarrassed by this story. Here I am going to Mass every day, as I mentioned, and I would avoid her. I didn't want her to have to ask me anything, and then I would say no, So if she was on the east side of the street, I would walk on the west side of the street, vice versa, just so I would avoid her. And I had all these imagine in the summer, she's got all this black stuff on, how she must have sweated, and she probably smelled, So anyway, stay away from her. So one Saturday morning, I'm in this butcher shop over on Wells Street, and a real fancy kind of, boutique kind of a butcher store. It used to be an old-fashioned butcher store, and this Italian guy ran it, and now his son, let's call him Tony, he ran it, because all Italian boys are Tony or Joey or Nicky or whatever. I'm Italian, by the way, so. So I go in there, and I'm talking to Tony about whatever I was having for dinner that night, and so I was like rib roast or whatever, I don't know, something fancy, because that's what you get at those stores. And so I'm talking to Tony, and who walks in but this woman from the sidewalk of the outside the L stop. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what Tony was going to do. So she walks up to Tony. This is the first time I ever hear her say anything. And she holds out her fist and opens it. And out drops some crumpled up dollars and some change, not much at all. If it was $3, I'd be surprised. She drops it in front of Tony, and she says, "What will that buy me?" And Tony, just like that, turns from our conversation and says, "As a matter of fact, that's the exact price of today's special." So he turns, and he gets out this great big slab of Italian bread, and he cuts it long ways. And then he opens up the cooler, and he takes out all these cold cuts, and not the domestic stuff, the imported, the good stuff. And he starts to slice it, and build this sandwich. And it's getting bigger and bigger. And then he puts a bread on top of it, puts some jardinere on there and wraps it. And to me now, I'm like, he's wrapping it in this, that brown paper like it was a gift. I mean, really, really carefully, thoughtfully done. He wraps it and he hands it to this woman. And her eyes were as big as saucers, And then she says to Tony, as she raises her hand over him and says, "Today, the Lord has made you one of his own." She turns and she walks out of the store. I'm dumbfounded. And I said, "Can I pay for that sandwich, Tony?" And he said, "No, Patrick, I'd rather have the blessing." Tony exemplified a sense of Christian love that I, in all my pious sense of myself, did not possess at that moment. We are all to be companions in the truest sense of that word. That word comes from the Latin meaning with bread. That's what companionships comes from an act of eating together. We're companions. And we are to be companions in that truest sense of the word. That's our goal. And that's the lesson for me of this parable. Now, parables are usually not true stories, but this one was true. And a parable is always supposed to, whenever you hear the word, Jesus has told them this parable, we're supposed to put ourselves in that story and find out what our place is. Who are we? Are we the woman? Are we Tony? Are we me? I hope you're not me. That woman at the Sedgwick Elk, she recognized that Tony was giving her much more than food that would perish. Tony was exemplifying a sense of generosity that meant more than material giving. It's got to be more. It must be the way that we treat one another. And we're to treat one another with charity, with love, always. And in all ways. We're to seek out those who suffer prejudice and the forgotten and the marginalized, and to demonstrate charity towards them. To be an example of God's love in their lives. And then, if we do that, we can call ourselves Christians. When we demonstrate that generous sense of charity, the example of what it means to be a companion on the journey of life. That's the lesson of Tony for me. That's the lesson of this parable for us all. What we have been given, we must give. And what we give, we will receive.